What's your relationship to death? Your own, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar at this point from the amount of meditation that I've died in, which if you really are prepared to do that activity, you, in its actuality, not in its struggle, you have to leave your life outside the door.
Yeah.
And uh, I'd say for the last 20 years, I have been prepared to do meditation in that way, as more like if you've ever traveled to someplace and bought only a one-way ticket. And that's my
Hmm.
relationship to meditation, is that
Yeah.
when I do it, it's a one-way ticket. That's a pretty casual statement for something that's not casual at all.
Thank you for agreeing to have this interview. I was very much looking forward to it. I heard a lot about you over the years, and you live in some kind of a farm with some people around.
There's a couple of dozen of us, and we have a couple of hundred acres, and we have a few houses, and we've been living here for about 20 years, and the personnel changes a little bit, but not a lot.
Are you quite secluded or somewhere near a town or something?
We're about a half hour from a town, fairly decent sized town.
Yeah.
So everything is available. You know the way it is now. You
Yeah.
have to get really far away for everything not to be available. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
don't want for anything, but we have a beautiful spot and plenty of room to walk around, especially in these times when things are locked down. We have a built-in community, you
Mm-hmm.
might say.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. I'm jealous. If you don't mind, wouldn't mind telling me like two, three formative or transformative experiences in your life leading to now. So which experiences would you choose as kind of the main events of your internal life?
Yeah, I'd say that the watershed moments always involved other people and interactions that I've had and people that I was fortunate enough to cross paths with. So starting with my teenage years and maybe even young adult years, when I spent some time with a man who had been a family friend,
Mhm.
and my interactions with him seemed ordinary, but became less and less ordinary the more I got to know him. And then people that I got to know after that, and uh, smoking marijuana and taking psychedelics, realizing that there was a whole nother possibility.
Mhm.
And then experiences in meditation, which were very difficult for me and challenging for me at first to even sit still. But then as I came to recognize the importance of it and be able to do that, it's some experiences there. But in terms of if you're asking about uh, what you might call supernatural or esoteric experiences, I would minimize those to say that uh, the experiences that I've had that have been most profound are have been in ordinary life and things that I've done and seen and in other than ordinary ways, and the profundity of those experiences have affected me probably more than anything that I've had that have could be considered serendipitous or magical or like that. Like this is all pretty magical right now, what's been happening.
Yeah. Well, if so, let me just probe a little bit more into it. If you kind of choose the relationship you had with the man, the family friend that you spent time with, in your teenage years. Um, can you think of a moment or an event when you realized that he was a mentor, a spiritual mentor for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Uh, a moment, a moment would be challenging, but I do remember uh, growing up in New York and being relatively arrogant, maybe very arrogant, being involved in gambling and uh, quasi illegal things that I was successful at, and feeling confident and bringing that confidence into my interactions with him, thinking that we were peers
Uh-huh.
and pretending that we were peers.
How
And
old, what was the age difference between you?
he was probably 40 and I was 20.
Okay.
And so about that time, starting to feel like maybe that wasn't the case, but fighting it within myself that sure, this is just another guy who knows a lot of stuff. And I don't know if it happened in a moment, but I do remember it happened, that I did recognize that he had a different state of being than I did. He had capacities that I didn't have. He had understandings that I didn't have. He had wisdom that I didn't have. And I was able to do something with him that I had never been able to do, which is maybe come under him a little bit,
Hmm.
when always in my life it was a battle to get here and being willing to settle for here, but
Uh-huh.
never here.
So would you you mean you actually recognize that it was your right place to be somewhere below?
Yes. Yeah, yeah, it was right. And then it became delightful and delicious and a love affair.
So that was a very new experience for you in relationship with another person.
That was a completely revolutionary experience for me, to not be competitive with someone. Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how such a major shift happens in a young person?
Well, he lived in South America, in the Andes Mountains near Lake Titicaca in Peru.
Hmm.
And so I went down there for summers, and I went down there for a couple of times for more extended periods of time. And I did things with him. He was the head of a weaving co-op, and he was a weaver himself.
Mm.
And so he would he was involved in commerce because he took the rugs and things that they weaved
Yeah.
to the city and sold them to wholesalers.
Hmm.
And I would go with him and uh, see the way he handled himself, see how honest he was, see how direct he was, see how energetic he was,
Mm.
see how good humored he was, and and consistent, I guess,
Mm.
consistent, because I
Mm.
lived in his house and I interacted with him and his friends in all sorts of ways, and other students that he had, which I didn't really realize were students at that time. And it was more like the everydayness of the consistency of his manifestations that wore away my resistance, you might say, but not so much in a moment,
Uh-huh.
but over time.
Well, did you also feel that that he related to you differently than any other person related to you in some ways?
Absolutely. He, well, I lived in his house. So and living in his house was interesting because I got to see the everyday man as well.
Yeah.
And he was very direct with me. Uh, he made observations about my behavior that no one else had ever made.
Uh-huh.
Uh, he he was always good humor about it, and I liked him. I liked his style. I liked his flexibility. I liked the way that he could handle himself and that he wasn't compartmentalized. I
Hmm.
never considered him a spiritual teacher, and I never had interest in spiritual matters.
Yes.
Uh, but something about the reality of his being uh, affected me without question.
Right. And then you said that smoking marijuana made a difference for you, but you said, I don't remember how you connected that to your relationship with other people, because you reframed it, you framed it as in context of relationships.
Yes, yes, for sure. Uh, there were moments, and I do remember one moment when I met a new group of people. This is back in the US and on the East Coast of the US. And I had been in Europe for quite a while, and I came back to the US and was living in Washington, D.C., and got a job there and met some people. And I had had a few marijuana and psychedelic experiences before that in South America, but very few.
Mhm.
And these people smoke grass a lot, and I did not. So I was curious about it, but not, but moderately curious. So we were sitting around and smoking marijuana, and one of the people there, a guy who was somewhat older than me, and I had a bit of a patriarchal relationship with the group of people that I was sitting with, asked me where I lived before I came there, and I said something about where I lived, and he said, "Well, how come you left?" And which is a question I could have so easily fielded with the bullshit that I was very adept at coming up with. And the first three words kind of got stuck in my throat. And being stoned had everything to do with that. And I started to hear those words in my head that and knew how ridiculous it was to tell this guy a story. And that moment was, if there were moments, that was a very significant moment for me, because I realized after that, and through the dynamics that I learned from this group of people and that we had together, honesty and directness was very important, and was what our exploration was about at that time.
Mm.
And in doing that, I recognized that I didn't have an honest manifestation available to me. Everything that I did was in some way manipulative. It was in some way deceptive. It was in some way uh, based on an agenda. And I had no idea that that was the case before.
I mean, what is similar in both the experiences you described is that basically you were in a situation that set quite a high bar, set a bar that was quite higher than where you felt you lived up to that point. I mean, it kind of gave you it revealed to you a certain potential, but also revealed that you were not living that potential.
Yes,
That
very accurate. It happened to be that I thought that I was living at a very high bar, but the very high bar that I was living was a bar of one-upsmanship and manipulation,
right.
and I was extremely good at it, and which comes in very handy at my present occupation.
Okay.
Hopefully for another purpose, but
Yes, I understand. Were there, um, can you would you say that a few other experiences you had in your life had that characteristic of kind of revealing the potential and how far how short you fall of it?
I can remember an early drug trip that I took, and thinking, very early drug trip that I took, and thinking that it was going to be a pathway to something in the successive hours that was going to be like beautiful and lights and sounds and like that. And what I was trapped with was my talking to myself the entire time with
Yeah.
no control whatsoever, whether it would be positive or negative, and having no idea that I had this creature in my head that was definitely in control, and I had no say whether it would stop or not. And it was extremely significant for me because I had no idea that that was going on. I knew and actually valued talking to myself because those were the times that I figured out things,
Yeah.
but didn't realize that I didn't have control of that manifestation. And when if the voices turned negative, then I couldn't stop them. So I have, even in this moment, I can picture where I was sitting and having that experience in the corner of a couch, uh, similar to the couch I'm sitting in now, but with a very different experience that I'm having now, and came away with the resolve that I would do something about this inner dialogue.
So what did you do to close the gap or to live up
Uh-huh.
to what was revealed to you?
Well, I had known, I had been taught a few years before that a tool, you might say, for quieting inner dialogue. And I did use it sporadically, but only for quieting the inner dialogue that I didn't want to have.
Okay.
And it was effective from time to time, but I got serious about it, recognizing that if you don't learn how to uh, uh, quiet inner dialogue, period, then you have no control about the particular stories that it's going to tell.
Hmm. Hmm. And what about the other, you know, I don't know, I don't know. I'll give them kind of code words. So the experience you had with your friend in South America in Peru sounds like an experience of a humbling experience. And then with that man in the marijuana group, sounds like maybe we can say you realize you're in inauthenticity. So what did you do about that? How did that affect? Were you determined to change that, or did you just notice it and continue went on living your life as usual?
Well, I've had an unusual life in that I have not had regular jobs. Uh, uh, the the closest I've had to a regular job is when I was married, working for a year for my father-in-law, and
Mhm.
that was hardly a regular job because a lot of it involved playing golf.
Okay.
So, so I've never really had that. I've always looked for ways that that attracted me to spend my time.
Yeah.
So that was the case for gambling, and I've owned a few restaurants, and that was attractive to me and interesting to me.
Mm.
And when things became uh, repetitious or no longer interesting, I moved on to do something else
Mhm.
because I didn't feel the necessity. I've always had the capacity to make money. I've known how to make money, and I've been able to make money. And maybe it's been a family trait that I've been good at that. So it's never been something I worried about, and that has allowed me either the laziness to do nothing or the motivation to do whatever it is I wanted to do, whether it was travel or so. When I was receiving these impressions, both about there being another way to be, which came from this interaction with this mentor teacher in South America, or recognizing my dishonesty, recognizing the possibility of another kind of openness. It became my job.
Mm.
I took it on. I took it on full time because I wasn't doing anything else. So I did it like I did everything else. I I took it on as a passion. I took it on as a full-time job, and I dedicated myself basically to doing whatever I could to seeing what was on the other side of these obstacles that were becoming more and more evident to me.
Um, were they really the same kind of, had the same quality as other decisions you made about what you want to do, or did that did, did those kind of decisions come from a different place than achieving or being good at something or succeeding?
I would say at first probably the same, probably something that that was challenging to me. I never rode horses as a kid. My sister rode horses,
Hmm.
and uh, our modus operandi was what she was good at, I wasn't good at, and what I was good at, she wasn't good at it.
Hmm.
So I was good at music. She stayed away from that. She was good at, like that. So she rode horses. I didn't, and I was basically afraid of the concept of sitting up high. And I got a job in the resort areas of New York, in upstate New York, and part of this resort was riding. They had a stable there and rode horses, so I hung around the stable because that's where the girls were. Girls like to ride horses, and so I hung around the stable. And then I went out with them once, and I fell off the horse. It was very embarrassing because I was trying to impress the girls I was riding with,
Yeah,
and I I resolved that I would become good at it. And so I spent the next year learning how to ride horses, and I got good at riding horses, and I got even to the point that I was working out horses at a racetrack.
okay,
So that kind of fanatic motivation for getting good at something was probably the same motivation that I had that I took on for challenges.
I see.
Uh, but after a while, the vibration, you might say, of the realizations of that motivation have to change a person to where they're coming from, and they did.
Hmm.
And I recognized that I recognized after a time, I don't remember how much time it was, a year or two, that this was really a different kind of a quest, that it required a different attitude, that it required humility, it required some kind of honesty and a bigger picture of things, that it wasn't so self-motivated. Those things came to me, not so much because I was looking for them, but
Mm.
if somebody really dedicates themselves to leaving the obstacles to limitations of that kind behind, that world will occur to them. And it
Hmm.
occurred to me.
Hmm. Hmm. Would you say that you still encounter, like in, if we look at the last 5 or 10 years, do you still encounter situations where you feel the bar is higher than where you're at?
Uh, I don't think I've ever left that feeling behind because the pay grade that I'm at, uh, which is a relatively high pay grade compared to the human experience. There are so many things that I am not made aware of, and I'm not. My counsel is not required or requested in terms of the fate of the human race and how it's what the design is and what happens. I mean, I could speak theoretically about it, but in actuality, I know so much, but there are questions that uh, in there's a book that's one of my favorites, that there's a saying, the stars are not for man,
Say
and
again, say
the
again.
the stars are not for man,
Yes.
and is in physics, and in space travel, it's the same. We can travel theoretically, we can even travel to Mars, maybe travel to Jupiter, maybe travel even beyond that, but the stars are not for man.
Mhm.
However we figure it astronomically, it's not going to happen. These bodies can't make that transition.
Yeah.
So in the same way, there are some you might call it understandings that are not for the human species. And uh, as elevated in that species as I have the good fortune to have a perspective, the stars are not for man.
Um,
It's a very big story, and part of that story is not available to me.
yes.
So I'm here.
Yes. But do you also run into situations where you feel like you felt, in your 20s and 30s, like there is, I see the potential, I know I can get there, but it's not where I'm at?
In terms of life situations, you mean?
Yes.
No.
When did that change? How did that change?
I think teaching, starting to teach. Uh, I went on a long retreat that I was sent to go on by this man in South America.
Hmm.
And so I spent 3 months by myself and had an extraordinary experience of being okay by myself, which I had never had before. And so the product of that process was I thought that I was now being free to do that. I thought that was going to be my life, that I would not be a recluse, but that I would get to spend time by myself, and I would get to write and read and look out at nature and do the things that I did during this retreat. Uh, and when I got back from this retreat, he told me that, okay, it's time for you to start passing on things that you understand. So I want you to spend some time and work out what you would teach and how you would teach it, because his system was very, I wouldn't even call it a system, was very different than anything that could happen in the US or any place in the Western world, really. uh, I was not prepared, and I was very surprised. I didn't expect that to happen. I didn't think I'd be involved with people, but I did. I got involved with people. I was in Oregon, at the University of Oregon, and at the University of Oregon, and I started a group, and really had no idea what I was going to do. But after doing that for a few years, I started to get some idea of what had to be done. And so I did that for a few years, and then he suggested that I put that aside. And so I took a break for 5 years from that, and then went back to it in 1980 in Santa Barbara. And I would say after maybe between 1980 and 1995 in Santa Barbara, about 15 years uh, of doing uh, having a group and having an expanding group and dealing with people there and learning what can only be learned by trying to pass things on.
Hmm.
A tremendously educational experience for me,
Yeah.
which I couldn't possibly have gotten in any other way. But then, by some good fortune, and through one of my students who happens to be still sitting here, right, looking at them right now, uh, suggested that we get involved in some social work type activities,
Hmm.
uh, go to a place and build a building or do something like that, which we had the capacity to do. I had never included that in my activities in any way whatsoever. And so that became part of the program,
Hmm.
doing that, learning what was that was about, learning the nature of people who are less fortunate. And I'd say after doing that for a few years, it started to, my state of being started to alter, so that I felt more of a, you might call it a we feeling. I don't know if that expression means
Yes,
something to you.
yes,
Uh,
I'm familiar
More
with
and more of a we feeling. So it wasn't so much that I knew things and they didn't, even though it wasn't a feeling of superiority, it was still a feeling of separateness. And I'd say that through the teaching and through the social work, which still is part of my program, not so much during this COVID year, but certainly
it.
before that, and will be after, that feeling, that we feeling changed so that I wasn't, my experience now isn't so much that I'm giving anything away any more than I'm doing this
Mhm.
and I'm giving my nose something for my hand. It's all, it feels very much, I know it's cliche in a bit, but it is my experience that, that, uh, the only reason we're all in this together because we're together.
Well, and does that uh, new shall we say we identity, what does it have a motivation that is different from the personal identity that you had?
Absolutely, it has the motivation comes much more from what do we need, what do we need, however big the we is, and
Mm.
if the we is the we that gets together for dinner, it's a we. If it's the we that's planning an expedition, it's a we. If it's a we that's uh, dealing with the fate of the human race, it's a we, or however big the we is that the necessity of the moment presents, uh, uh, is very different than an I identification. I have the good fortune to have uh, connected with people who are willing to be part of this experiment with me. So my position in that experiment isn't that I sit on a throne and point out what people should do. You know, I do my own laundry and I wash my own dishes mostly, and you know, I cook and I do all the stuff. And when we have a building project, I do stuff, except I don't do concrete. But
Okay.
Uh, but you know, we do the stuff together, and these people that I know are willing to cohabit with me. And there are people that I've lived with for a lot of years, 30 plus years, and they're even sitting in this room now and listening
Uh-huh.
to us talking. And there are some people that have come around in the last few years, and the only program I have now really is living together and doing stuff together. So they get to see me, I get to see them. There's no bullshit, you know. There's no putting on acts, and you know, you can try for a while, but sooner or later, you know, it is what it is.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Well, I lived in a spiritual community for 20 something years, and I always felt that the person who was uh, leading the project felt a lot more, well, not necessarily a lot more, but a little more than responsible for the success of the project than everybody else. And that little bit more was a major difference, made a major difference between his role and those who were only 95% responsible. Is that also your experience, or is it
I
not?
think that's a very interesting observation. Uh, if you're talking about overview, let's put overview aside for a moment.
Okay.
The nature of, first of all, we live on a lot of land, so we have to take care of the land,
Uh-huh.
and we deal with it together.
Okay.
Pretty much everything we do together.
Yeah.
Uh, then we have a little business stuff that we do. We do that together. Then we have the everyday house things that we have, you know, the repairs and the traveling and the cars, and we do that together. So, but everyone doesn't do everything.
Sure.
So, so our areas of responsibility are definitely compartmentalized in that way. So, somebody recently we've been cutting down trees because last year was a very big fire year here in
Yes.
California.
Yes.
So we've we're pushing back from our houses, moving the trees back a little, and I've taken very little responsibility in that project, but somebody has taken responsibility. So uh, there are people here that take more responsibility for aspects of what takes place here than I do. There's no question about it. And when we go on expeditions, social work expeditions, there are people that take responsibility that I don't take. But in terms of overview and the overview of the direction, I would say that that's accurate. I would say that uh, that uh, I have the overview. I have a responsibility for the overview more so than anybody else has that responsibility for the overview, and
Mm.
I carry that responsibility because I have that perspective.
And what about the inner work? Do you feel that you are leading that as well in terms of kind of feeling responsible for everybody in a way that not everybody feels equally responsible?
Yeah. Also a good question. The nature of the inner work here requires me really to lead from behind. Now, I really have learned this successively from the beginning when I thought that I had to make everything happen to less and less and less and less
Hmm.
until I realized that the ratio is, I say that it's 80-20. I think it's really 95-5.
Hmm.
That people have to, individuals have to put in so much of the impetus and the motivation for their own inner work themselves, and if it's not there, I can't supplement it from externally, but I can put in that 5%. So I have the 5% solution here.
Okay.
And I am I believe that I am true to that 5% solution, but it has decreased over the years. Probably is as it is at its greatest now, where I could actually say it is 5%. And most questions that I'm asked, I respond to as, "What do you think? You do what you think you should do."
Hmm.
But I do maintain for that inner work, whether the inner work in our case is conversational, it's meditational, it's tools of different kinds using,
Hmm.
and I do oversee that those dynamics are not misused, rather than encourage their being used. So
Right.
I don't feel myself so much a cheerleader to them being used, but when it's about to go over the edge, I do step in, usually.
That's interesting. That's very interesting. So that's, I mean, this being involved with the dynamics of the collective, with the spiritual growth, with the inner mechanics of a collective, is requires special talents or skills or abilities that probably, don't are not acquired when you just teach one to one, or when you're a spiritual teacher on a personal kind of dynamic level. How did that kind of something that you acquired over the 20 something years that you lived together?
Well, I'd say that the number of people, I don't go anywhere. Well, certainly this year I haven't gone anywhere,
Yeah.
but every place I go, we go together. Pretty much everything we do together. And the we has been as many as maybe 50 people when I was in Santa Barbara. Now it's 20.
Mhm.
So 20 people is a pretty intimate, I have intimate connections with each of the 20 people. It's not like I don't know the details of people's lives. And if I don't, I make sure to find them out. So I'm very much in a one-to-one relationship with 20 people.
Yeah.
And that is different, certainly, than a one-to-one with one person. But for some reason, I am able to do it, and I don't do anything else. And my overall philosophy about human capacity is that it is drastically obscured by obstacles. And
Mhm.
if those obstacles are removed, the ability to know what is going on uh, increases tremendously. Like, for instance, say, if we were driving through a city, and all in that city, all the cars, I don't know if this example is going to work out, but let's try it. All the
Yeah.
cars they were all vintage cars, all old cars that were all shiny. And I was riding with a friend, and that friend was talking to themselves and worrying about things and like that. And I was looking at the cars. And when we got through this traffic or this city, I would say, "Wow, what'd you think about those cars?" And they would say, "What cars?"
Yeah.
And the only thing that I had that allowed me to notice was that I wasn't thinking about myself. And there was, I don't know if you've ever crossed paths with a man named Rene Domal, but he
Oh
wrote
yeah. I read what's the name of the mountain? Mount.
Mount Analog, yes,
Yes.
Mount Analog. And in
Yes.
Mount Analog, he says shoes are important. You can't do without them, and you have to take care of them. 15 minutes a day is enough.
Okay.
And I feel that about our human, personal, private, individual human existence, that
Mhm.
it's really important. We have to take care of it. 15 minutes a day dwelling on ourselves is enough.
Mhm.
And so I think that's the case for me. And since that's the case for me, I notice all kinds of stuff.
Uh-huh.
I think anybody would that isn't preoccupied, self preoccupied. So the capacity that we're talking about, I don't think is as remarkable as it might appear. It
Mhm.
is certainly unusual and remarkable in that way, but it's very available. All a person has to do is, I wouldn't say all, but something of which a person has to do is 15 minutes a day. But I do agree with you. Some IQ points are needed there too,
Okay.
and and some life experience is needed there too. And when I say life experience, I mean what I've called and I've said before, different languages, as in the language of cooking and the language of business and the language of car repair and the language of carpentry and uh, the language of sports and the language of gambling and the language of illness. And there are so many areas of knowledgeability to have. And the nature of my life has led me through a lot of areas of knowledgeability, not so much skimming the surface of things, but actually building houses from scratch and starting businesses from scratch and having a marriage from scratch, which was very scratchy, and and having kids from scratch.
That's how
And
it works usually. Yes.
all those things, all those things leading to being able to talk the different languages. So, meeting people and knowing something about what they've been through. And so being able to have those one-to-one experiences. I think without that, you're a guru and you sit in the cave and you know about caves and you know about esoteric life. I mean you, but one does,
Mhm.
and the ability to communicate to other people is limited to have them come to where you are,
Yes.
and they can't come to you where you are because life in the U.S. is what it is. So you have to come to where they are.
Uh-huh.
So I've learned how to do that, and my life has been led me through those experiences.
Um, that's very interesting, because I one of the themes that I'm interested in that came up in my interviews with different spiritual exemplars is that they have like the mainstream of their life, which is their spiritual work, and many of them are teachers, and then they have hobbies or unrelated uh, things that they love doing. For example, my main thing these days, or my main thing in life, is my spiritual journey. And I have a vegetable garden that I can't imagine my life without, but I don't quite see the connection between my work in the garden and my spiritual work.
Ah,
And you're speaking about something very different, where like everything feeds or informs the same stream of life.
well, I think that's interesting because I think everything does feed the same stream of life. I don't think your vegetable garden is separate from your spiritual work. It's just that we learn that they're separate and we don't quite know how they come together. But as I said before, I think when the obstacles of the unexamined concept of separateness is is lifted a little bit or alleviated a little bit, those similarities, those connections come together because I grow tomatoes every year and am very involved in my tomato growing and very
So let's use that as an example.
okay. Let's
How is
talk
it related?
tomatoes.
Let's talk tomatoes. How is that related to what's most important in life, or whatever way you relate to spiritual the spiritual pull or movement?
Well, it becomes much easier working with other people because working with myself and tomatoes, uh, there certainly is a connection to that I make to nature, a connection that I make to something that I don't have the influence to say you should grow now.
Mhm.
It's not there's no microwave that I'm going to turn on that's going to make those tomatoes appear. I also have I also have a certain capacity for the ditches I'm willing to dig, and people that are also that are either willing to dig or enthusiastic about digging ditches and running the tractor. And so there's a synthesis of working together that happens there that's very esoteric because it reflects the synthesis of how everything goes together. We look at nature and we see, aside from man, how it does all kinds of things, and the leaves fall, and they help the ground, and the walnuts fall, and they grow the trees, and we are not part of that dynamic at all, really. We have to figure out how we're part of it, but watching it happen and being part of it is extraordinary.
Yeah,
So uh,
yeah,
my recommendation of closeness to nature, whether it's a vegetable garden or living in the woods, is considerable. I'll add that I don't know if you've read uh, Herman Hesse. I'm sure you've read some of it, but
yeah.
in his story about the bead game, there's a synthesis, the Magister Ludi story, where there's a synthesis of this game that he fabricates, which he never describes, but is very real to me. How music and mathematics and nature and
Yes.
and cooking all come together, even though the languages are different. There is a synthesis in them that comes together. And I very much like the dynamic of talking the language of spirituality through cooking.
Yeah,
And the language of spirituality, I think, is the language of direct spirituality, in my opinion, is the most corrupt language that we have ever developed because the terms are grossly inexact. whether it's spirit or source or God or or any of the words that are used and they're feel-good words, but they are never subjected to the preciseness that how much salt you add to spaghetti sauce to make it taste good. So I, I have made a big part of my learning and teaching in developing a precise way of referring to things, uh, so that this vagueness of spiritual reference, which is so much part of the New Age culture, and makes everybody feel good. And if you read, and I know you participate in Twitter and Facebook, and I do as well now,
Mhm.
you see so many words that people say, I love that, I follow that. And they're beautiful words, but is there any agreement to what these words mean?
No, which
Very,
is exactly why in this research I am very interested in the moments that happen during interviews when the interviewee is looking for words to describe their experience rather than bring along, accumulated vocabulary and knowledge. And I also, just to tell you, I specialized in what's called microphenomenology, which is really looking for the subtlest, hardly discernible inner movements from which then ideas and language can come out freshly and creatively, I would say. So for me, that's the language of spirituality. It's not
cliche.
yes,
Mhm,
yes.
mhm, mhm.
um, I want to ask you a bit about two themes that are of great interest for me, and one is what I call integration. So basically, bringing all of ourselves to take part in the most important endeavor, and the other question is, which is related to it, is the question of practice. But let's start with the question of integration. And do you still have any parts of yourself that you feel you kind of are prodding or pushing or inviting to join the party that are not quite there yet?
I think that's a good question. I'll answer the personal one in a minute, but the concept of parts of us seems so critically important because the representation of I as a whole is is so burdensome because we're always defending
Mm,
that we're one indivisible I, and anybody who has done any kind of self-study whatsoever has discovered that this is clearly not the case.
yes.
So,
It's a
so
bit of a shattering discovery, you could
it
say.
is a it is a shattering discovery, and everyone that participates in this undertaking with me is exploring that particular discovery and being confronted with that discovery as it unfolds, and of course being in a position of having some parts which find we see danger in this exploration and are finding places to hide
Of
till
course.
hopefully this exploration will run its course and
Yes.
it will be able to remain alive.
Yes.
But the nature of living together and the way that we operate here, with the moment after moment, with so much scrutiny,
Hmm.
it becomes very difficult to have these places to hide, and
Hmm.
that's why there's so few people here, and the attrition rate
Of
that
course.
I have is astronomical. I
Hmm.
have the biggest attrition rate of a spiritual teacher in history.
Okay. That's a
I
good
have
sign. That's a
I
good
have
sign.
the worst percentage of success possible.
Well,
And so let's get to the personal part of it
yeah.
now.
Yeah.
I'd say uh, if I had different living circumstances, I would say there would be that capacity to have selves in me, let's call them selves in me, that could have withstood the scrutiny of waking up and seeing people at breakfast and seeing people at dinner and seeing people all the way through that,
Mm.
and even things that happen at other times and in other situations, so that uh, my view is that the dynamic of these, let's call them selves, is they don't have to disappear because they're all interest groups and they're
Yeah.
important interest groups, but some self has to grow that's bigger than all these selves, and that so all these selves are subject to that big self. So this thing, which is a formulation, it's a
Yes.
formulation.
Yes. Yes.
It's not an actuality,
Of
but
course.
it's a formulation for exploration, and it works
Yes.
for exploration.
Yes.
Uh, People try to use it for explanation, but it really is only good for exploration. And
Yes.
I see that you understand what I'm talking about,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
So the nature of growing this self that cannot be fooled and has this intention and valuation, so that it is supervising rather than being subject to the whims of these other selves,
Yes.
is a gradual process.
Okay.
And I can't see how that can happen in a compartmentalized way when you actually go to school and then you come home, and then you go to school and you come home, and you go to school, come home.
Yes.
The people that I know and myself don't have any place to hide. There's no place to go. So, I mean, we all have individual spaces,
Mm.
but so you spend the time in the individual spaces, uh, dwelling on how you fucked up when you were together. So you're always in your,
We always have something to contemplate.
you always have something to contemplate. So if you personally want to know by this time, do I have any holdouts? The answer is no.
Okay. And okay. And how do you deal? Because you spoke about your identity being the we identity. So you must feel affected by the holdouts of other people as well, I assume. How
You
does
know too much.
that?
That's good. I appreciate it. Affected by them
Yeah.
externally, certainly. If I certainly have personal preference. I have personal preference with food. I have personal preference with weather. I have personal preference with the heat of a swimming pool.
Of course.
So I have personal preference, and I have not left those personal preferences behind. I'm not driven by them, but I certainly have them, and I have personal preference as to the functioning and the level of uh, the level of dynamic of the people around me.
Yes.
But I am in no position to demand or to expect anything of that. So I have to accept that dynamic when it happens. I can encourage it to that 5% that I can encourage it. I can steer it if I can from behind when I can. But would I prefer it was more elevated in times when it's not? Uh, Absolutely. But do I appreciate having found people that are willing to go through this dynamic with me? The level of appreciation I have for that cannot be expressed in words, because it didn't have to be the case.
Yeah. Yeah. So let me ask you a little about practice, and I want to ask about practice in the most open way. So to let you define what you considered as practice and in the past, and what you consider as practice now, how you define practice, and what it is, what is it for you?
Okay. Uh, I see there's an overall practice that the tools to achieve that practice are part of. The overall practice is seeing things as they are. The dynamics, in order to see things as they are, become the active principles in what I encourage, what I teach, the specific tools to see things as they are. And the reason behind that is because if there's any manipulation, there's effort, there's struggle. Let's not say there's struggle, because struggle can be a positive thing as well. Let's say there's stress, because uh, if right now gravity is allowing me to sit on this couch and be comfortable sitting on this couch, and I could sit here for quite some time. But if I was flapping my arms and trying to stay a foot above the couch, it would be it would be stressful, and I could only do it for a little while. So in order to be relaxed, and I define relaxed as being with what is, not trying to create what isn't, whether it be an image or in self-confidence or in anything, then one must learn what is in the individual manifestation and learn what isn't, learn what's been laid on us, what we've been caused to believe, what we were in our passive state of being children. We learned this is right, this is wrong, all these things, and not have to go to the past to re-examine those things, but to see their manifestation in the present. Because these things that happen in subtleties, which you obviously appreciate, I see 1,000 times a day. And I encourage my friends, my students, to see them 12 times a day, or 20 times a day, or 50 times a day, but I see them 1,000 times a day. So I recognize that something has to be introduced as a medium, as a tool to get from the state of not knowing what's going on and assuming to one knows what's going on, to actually seeing what is. And I have put a lot of energy, that thematic energy that I referred to, into developing tools, into seeing how they can be used, and much more important, how they can be misused, and putting them into experimental action, leaving some behind, renovating some, using them myself in the process, using myself as my major laboratory and guinea pig, along with anybody else who was in the process or who is in the process of being willing to do that with me. And so that's the program pretty much, seeing things as they are, because as I said, my philosophy is that this beautiful spirit, this beautiful inner reality that is possible for us requires a process of removal of obstacles to this something. And what I have seen and evidence in myself as is that is really all that has to be done. There's not building of consciousness, there's not building of divinity, there's not building of anything. There's removing to see the naturalness. And
Mhm.
that's about as cliche as I'm willing to get about this.
Well, I know that I don't, actually, I don't know if you, do you practice meditation yourself?
Meditation is a very formidable part of the practice, but I have a very defined philosophy about that practice, in that the generic term meditation, which can be used as in TM, transcendental meditation, as a relaxation response, which can absolutely help your life, or other things, other activities that people have done to make their muscles feel okay, or that the generic term, I use the term meditation, or I, in a way, avoid the term meditation because it is so imprecise and so generic.
Okay.
And I use it in a way of an extremely advanced exercise that can only be uh, uh, incurred at a certain level. Beneath that level, we have to do things to get to that, you might call it vibration of meditation or close to it. And then meditation becomes something other than fighting with the inner dialogue and fighting with the bodily restlessness, which in my opinion should not be contended with in meditation.
Mhm.
I believe, and this is a controversial view that I have, that I recognize that I have, but it is my view that meditation in the form that allows for the deep uh, connection with the inner vibration that keeps it all going is not available if you, when you sit down, you have to fight with your talking to yourself or your bodily restlessness and like that. So I am completely in adverse to the point of view of Buddhism and its meditation, of really any meditation that doesn't have an extreme preparatory period where people are fighting these battles with this in the school of life
Yeah.
and getting to a place in their vibration, in their ability where they can sit and meditate, and it's not like uh, starting the process of self-discovery at that point. So I don't.
Well, let me ask you, in your experience, the meditation, the practice of meditation as you described it now, is it different in any way from spontaneous meditation, from finding yourself spontaneously meditating?
Is it for me now?
Yes.
How is it for me now?
Yeah.
Well, uh, in levels, because there's a level of meditation that that I practice that takes me to a place where this really doesn't exist. Uh, that's about as accurate as I can get.
That's, I
Uh,
understand.
and if I'm driving a car, that is clearly not either available to me or desirable to me.
Yes.
But there is a state of, I don't have the word for it, uh, detachment would not be accurate because it is attachment to something, but to something more permanent that is more constant for me. Let's say if there were an actual buzz to the energy that keeps everything going, and that buzz were the buzz was inaudible and invisible, but really existed, but it was covered by the noise of life and all that life had. But beneath the noise of life, it existed.
Mhm.
And and as the noise of life quiets down, it becomes more evident. So the noise of life doesn't have to become 100% quiet down as it does sitting in the dark with no stimulus whatsoever. But even if it's a half covered down, quieted down, that buzz, which is not an esoteric concept, but is an actual zzz, becomes more uh, available. And so that buzz, depending on my external activity, is always available to me, but in degrees, depending on of my the necessity of my external attention. Is that
Yes. No, I'd love to go more into what we can call it buzz. Um, d- does it have any qualities? Is it knowledge? Is it in you or outside or everywhere? How do you experience it?
I think that anything I would say to describe it would be inaccurate.
Okay.
I think I'm going to pass on that question.
Okay. Okay, so I will not ask you about the buzz, but I will ask you about your relationship to the buzz.
Okay.
Why is it, why are you attracted to it, or why is it important? to
I'd say
you?
more, it's, I don't have a relationship with it. It allows, it allows my existence. So it's not really, we have a relationship,
Okay.
you know,
Okay.
it's the is, I'm the, you know what I mean? Uh, it came before I was here.
Yeah.
So it's in a way, what I say to people is meditation is none of your business. And that I feel that about that my references to something that energizes my life is, you know, have you ever read the Pirandello's Characters in Search of an Author? I don't know if you've read that, but it's a story about the characters in the book deciding what they would do if it weren't for the author controlling their life.
Okay.
So it's a
Okay.
brilliant story, really,
Uh-huh.
and I feel that in a way that right now that this energy is in action,
Yeah.
and it's real to me in a way that it's not a thought, it's not a feeling, it's something else.
Yes.
But I am aware of it, but I am less aware of it than I would be if I was sitting in the dark in my room, uh, because this external manifestation is necessary to do life. So
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
it's more in the background, and anybody who says that it's with them to the same degree all the time, I would stay away from that person on the highway for sure.
Okay. Well, you just said something fascinating to me, which is that um, that actually it. Okay, I don't know how to repeat it, but it had something to do with it's more you're more aware of it in action than sitting in the dark in your
No, no, no,
no,
less. The
less
opposite.
less.
Less. Yeah, not aware of it. Yes, I'd say even aware of it. I'd say that right now I have an awareness of that something,
Yeah.
but I am only allowed to have a certain amount of awareness because I'm doing,
Okay.
and doing is energized by that awareness, but doing is a coarser manifestation than that awareness itself, so that
No, no, but let's stay there, please, because I got to tell you this is the question that started my whole research.
uh-huh,
Is how can I be more connected, more of the time, more aware of that buzz or whatever we cannot describe, and manifest it, express it, bring it into who I am and into the world more of the time, regardless of what I'm doing or throughout everything that I'm doing. So that's
yeah,
kind of, and that's why I went seeking spiritual exemplars as people who supposedly know something about this question.
uh-huh. I can answer that question with two very definitive answers.
Okay.
The first one is that you have to have some forevision of what this reality is that we're talking about, and that happens through meditation. You learn it through meditation. You tripping it over it in life is so noisy that one can realistically, maybe a few thousand years ago when people are a farmer in the field, they didn't do anything, they could trip over it in life.
Right.
Our life is just all over the place.
Yes.
To trip over life is virtually impossible.
Yes.
So we need that forevision that comes through, that can come through meditation.
Do we need to reinforce it
we need to
ongoingly?
we need to reinforce it. Yes, we need to reinforce it by visiting it as from time to time, and maybe even frequently.
Okay.
And it can that forevision can even be induced by psychedelics.
Yeah.
they're dangerous because they have their downside, because they create a fictitious dependence.
Yeah.
And we can even start thinking that they are the manifestation
Yes.
when we are the manifestation.
Yes.
So meditation is the purest way for a forevision, but it's not easy to come by because we're so restless. But we need that forevision. We also need to remove the obstacles to that natural state. So the idea of making ourselves more of an agent, making ourselves more able to manifest it, is possible by the action of removing the obstacles, removing letting them go, the fear, the anxiety, the embarrassment, the competition, the restlessness, the focused on the future, uh, worried about the future, worried about the past, the availability of presence. All those things are removals of obstacles, and then the natural state is there. And that, in combination with the experience of what is not our natural state, in a way of being not the doers and not the manifestors, but the agent of that energy,
Yes.
that we learn through meditation, that combination of things works its way. Now that's a mouthful. I said it in 2 minutes, but it takes a lot
Yeah.
to 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 get the forevision. It takes a lot to remove the obstacles. It takes priority, is what it takes.
Yes. Yes. And how does um, doing the work that you're doing with other people, how does that relate? Is that does that okay? I'll be more specific because it's obvious to me that it helps with the second part of removing the obstacles. But does it also make you more aware of that energy or buzz being with other people?
As yes and no.
Okay.
Being with other people is the best of times and the worst of times. That's from Tale of Two Cities.
Yeah.
So the possibilities are extraordinary. The downsides are ubiquitous.
Mm.
If it weren't for, if a person didn't have someone to watch out for the downsides, I advised go it on your own, because the downsides are considerable. But
Yeah.
if you have someone who is really aware of those downsides, then the possibilities become extraordinary, or can become
Mhm.
extraordinary.
Mhm.
So, so if you're asking, in the practice of removing obstacles, uh, does that the presence of that of a bigger principle, inner principle, become more aware? I'd say very gradually, but uh, with the addition of the possibility to go within inside and leave all the outside things behind in meditation, it becomes more and more possible, and that synthesis becomes more possible of having that connection be in awareness during activity.
Right. Right. I'm aware we've been going on for more than an hour and a quarter, so I'm kind of gradually will wrap it up for now. And
Okay.
um, I do
I have
want
a couple of questions I want to ask you
you
too.
do okay.
Yeah, but
We'll
when
leave
we're
some time for that.
yeah.
What I don't know if you can relate to this question, but I'll ask it anyway. What is the growing edge for you nowadays, or is it? Do you have a personal growing edge, or is it only collective?
Uh, that's a good question. Someone asked me that a few days ago. Uh, well, I'm in my 70s, so uh, hopefully most of the learning has been happened.
Yes.
Hopefully, I am definitely receptive to learning more. I don't, in my interactions with people, uh, uh, I don't feel like I have the last word, and this is the last word on something. I don't know if you know that expression. You
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
do.
yeah.
That I feel like I am receptive because variables change, times certainly change. So I feel like I'm receptive to being better at what I seem to be called on to do.
Hmm.
So if there's a growing edge, I see that I have to be receptive to that in something as specific as getting involved in social media, which I wasn't involved in until last August.
Hmm.
And anything that I've done on social media has been completely since some people are having to go because they're getting their vaccine shots.
Okay.
Uh, so I have I am receptive to that. I recognize the necessity of that. I just put together a book which is going to be out in the next 2 weeks,
Ah,
which is a book of things that I call uh, 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 quotographs. Quotographs. I think they're generally called memes, if you know
okay.
what, but
Yes.
I call them quotographs. I think it's a much better word.
Okay.
Photographs are photographs that I've taken or friends have taken with sayings on those photographs
Oh,
that aren't
I saw these
that are,
on your Facebook page.
yes, I do. I like to do quotographs that actually there's a relation between the photo and the quote
I see.
rather than just be a pretty background with a quote.
Yes.
So I'm putting together, I would have never thought of putting together that book, which I've had tremendous amount of enjoyment and learning in putting those, making those connections
Uh-huh.
and learned more about learned more for myself about the connection of visual and intellectual.
Mm.
Then, like in moments, seeing the not having to necessarily put a sun in the picture, but being able to put some action in life in the picture and seeing the uh, the the words that come up with that sight.
I see. I see.
So I see myself very much on the learning edge in that way.
Yeah.
Uh, the learning edge of what makes me tick, I can't say absolutely I'm there because shit happens. But but and I'm prepared for the shit to happen
Yeah.
to see it. But so far I'm pretty much there.
Yes. What's your relationship to death? Your own, I mean.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar at this point from the amount of meditation that I've died in, which, if you really are prepared to do that activity, you, in its actuality, not in its struggle, you have to leave your life outside the door.
Yeah.
And uh, I'd say for the last 20 years, I have been prepared to do meditation in that way as more like if you've ever traveled to someplace and bought only a one-way ticket. And that's my
Hmm.
relationship to meditation,
Yeah.
is that when I do it, it's a one-way ticket. That's a pretty casual statement for something that's not casual at all,
Yes.
because I did meditation for 20 years before that, where it definitely was not a one-way ticket. It was an exercise, it was a discipline, and sometimes an extraordinary discipline. But the one-way ticket is very different. And if one uh, uh, eases themselves into the concept of one-way ticket and allows that to happen, then the coming back is not as scary, maybe not scary at all.
Hmm.
So my relationship to a trip in which there is, you know what Shakespeare says, that in which there is no return,
Yeah.
uh, is about the same as it was before I was born and how scared I was for that.
when or why or how did it change from your practice of meditation from being a two-way ticket to a one-way ticket?
I'd say gradually.
Yeah.
I'd say gradually. I didn't have an all of a sudden moment. I'm
Okay.
not a get hit on the head by a rock kind of guy
Okay.
where I could tell that story. I
Uh-huh.
think from practice, and go. Everything that I've really learned and known has been gradual.
Yeah.
Everything I teach is gradual. I believe in baby steps. I believe in that for investing money. I believe in that in starting a project. You don't think of if you think of building a house from scratch on land that hasn't been cleared, it's oh fuck, how where do I get started? And
Yeah.
I remember in this house I'm sitting in right now, which is a considerable house which we built from scratch
Mm.
on land that was uncleared. The first venture into that land, I had to crawl on hands and knees, and every once in a while to stand up to see what was around.
Mhm.
And if I would have looked at that as, oh my God, how are we gonna ever do this? But one step at a time, and it happens.
Mhm.
So I'd stay in the case of your question,
Yeah.
it happened gradually, and that's
Well, thank you. I'm done for today, and
okay. Tell
I hope you be willing to have another interview because I think if I after I go over everything we spoke today, I probably have many more questions.
I have to tell you something about my appreciation for this interaction, because your questions reflect an understanding and reflect experience, which I very much appreciate. I
Thank
have, I don't do anything else. I'm not busy. I'm not busy, and I don't have a schedule.
you. Okay.
Uh, so uh, my priority in my priority and has been and uh, is not I'm not making a departure from that priority by talking to you.
I see.
You
I
know,
see.
this is part of
Yes.
what I do. This is part of what I love. This is part of what I seem to be doing here on this planet at this point.